Hi Dylan.
Hey.
Do you want to introduce yourself to the pod to our listeners?
Hey everyone, my name is Dylan Niragesh. I'm a filmmaker, originally from Bangkok, Thailand. I moved here when I was 18, well, to Brisbane first.
We
Lived
met
in,
in Brisbane.
yeah.
We're both. Would consider yourself like a Bris Vegas person? Would you?
Uh, I would, I don't think I would want to be.
What do you
I mean, I've got
mean?
family around there,
What
but
do you mean? Have you just like disassociated from it ever
yeah,
since leaving?
I've forgotten about it.
Oh my
It's
god.
it's in the past. It's part of like my dreamy set of memories.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, you been for real?
Yeah. Thailand is like one big dream to me.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay. So sorry, I interrupted you. So you're a filmmaker.
Filmmaker.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did my undergrad in film in Brisbane,
Hmm.
and I worked in post production for a few years, and then I got into the master's program at a film school here called Afters,
Mm.
the Australian Film, Television, and Radio School, and I recently ish finished that. Kind
Yeah.
of graduated last year, and um, my graduate film recently uh, had me awarded Emerging Australian Filmmaker at the Melbourne International Film Festival
That
last year.
is so
Yeah,
cool. So cool.
it was very. I was very surprised, but
Yeah.
it's a very amazing opportunity.
I'm so happy for you. We'll definitely touch base on that, but I first wanted to ask you about your upbringing and your earliest memory as a child.
Earliest memory.
Yeah.
I think it would be just at a nursery and being picked up by my nanny at the time.
Mm.
Both my parents working full time when I was a little kid in Thailand.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, I always see Thailand as a place where, you have to be really hustling to get by.
Mm.
There, there aren't the same kind of safety nets as, you might have as an Australian here.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, besides that, maybe being in the garden at
Mm.
one of our older houses and thinking I'd seen a snake. But really, I was just like hallucinating or something.
Oh my God. What was your family dynamic like growing up?
They both worked in the same kind of. They both ran the business,
Mm.
and they had a TV production company, but they were mainly doing documentary style travel programs based in Thailand, and at one point worldwide, back when television had a lot of money. This
Mm.
was
Back when television had a lot of money.
yeah.
Nowadays.
Yeah, and this was, I mean, mid to late 90s, early 2000s, before the internet really kicked in. And yeah, I think we got to travel around quite a bit to
Around like
around
where?
Thailand, but
Yeah.
they did a lot of work in various countries overseas. Like
Mm.
they went to Egypt and Iran and amazing locations like in those countries. And but I mean, I would have been too young at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been moments where we've been to New Zealand together, but
Yeah.
usually these trips are work trips, and
Yeah.
I would be the child host of their
Mm.
program in these areas, but they'd be linking up with Tourism New Zealand or Tourism Australia, that sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Oh, that's so interesting. I feel like even though you've told me this before about like your parents, but now I'm like, oh wait, do you feel like that influenced you wanting to get into film?
I don't know. I feel that
Or what did you want to do like when you were a little boy or so?
I didn't really have anything in mind
Yeah.
until nearing the final years of high school in
Mm.
Thailand. And I mean, I went to an international school there, but they kind of negotiated my education with the owner, and I was very lucky to
What do
have
you mean
that schooling.
negotiated?
Well, they would do the marketing videos for the school
Oh, okay, yeah.
in exchange for us attending the school, me and my brother.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Wow.
so we were very lucky.
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise, I'd be living in Brisbane, growing up in Brisbane.
Yeah.
Um, and Yeah, I mean, I wasn't very particularly academic, up right up until maybe my final year, and
Mm.
I was always thinking of doing something creative like architecture or design,
Okay, yeah.
which is still kind of fascinating to me,
Yeah.
and very much within my realm of interests with my
Mm.
own work, you know.
Yeah, I feel like I could see that.
Yeah, and at the end, I picked film, and I mean, I had family in Brisbane, and I know I needed fairly good grades, and like
Mm.
I outdid myself really in my final year, and I think that kind of surprised me and gave me so much confidence going into whatever it is I chose to do.
I,
You know?
I feel like you've said this twice where you've been like, oh, I was quite surprised. Like,
Yeah.
do you feel like you go into things kind of having like low expectations, or what are usually like your, or what are your expectations?
Well, I like being surprised. I
Yeah.
generally kind of go into something not expecting
Mm.
anything grand to come out of it.
Mm.
I'm very generally pessimistic, you know, and there are so many people out there struggling that I kind of put myself into that bucket
Mm.
too. You know, success is very hard to come by, and I
Mm.
think, I mean, I don't like the idea of the world being, you know, this place where you have to hustle so incredibly hard to exist in and
Mm.
be able to live in
Mm.
comfortably.
Mm.
But you know, I'm passionate about my work, and
Mm.
I dedicate a lot of my time to it.
Mm. I Yeah, I always like think about that as like an artist in whatever form, that there's this level of like needing to be like hopeful, obviously having the faith, but then also in a way to like protect yourself, that you need to I don't know, it's like not being pessimistic, but it's like having low expectations, but then it's also, do you believe in manifesting? Like,
Manifesting?
or kind of like that realm when it comes to like spirituality of I guess like seeing yourself, like, you know, like feeling and envisioning where you see yourself. That sometimes I'm like, how are you able to kind of like protect yourself as an artist, because obviously it's such a competitive industry and there's so many different like things that come to play,
Yeah.
but then also be like hopeful. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I'm fortunate in the fact that I've decided on what it is I want to be doing
Mm.
long term. And I've got a clear cut goal in wanting just to be a director of either narrative or documentary or
Mm.
experimental. And I think because I've kind of soloed in on that, I know what I want,
Mm.
and that makes it much easier for me to direct my interests or be open to interests that might feed into that,
Mm.
even if it's work overseas or, you know, different facets of that kind of directing work, like documentary or narrative,
Mm.
very similar but different at the same time. Um, I Yeah, I mean, spirituality. I mean, I have to be open to that kind of thinking as well. I think you have to. I also look into like the history of spirituality and religion and in
Mm.
contemporary culture, and I think that all feeds into the world that we're living in. Because a lot of my work is very conceptual.
Mm.
If I'm world building, you know, for each particular project, I'd like to know the details of what I'm
Mm.
working with, just so I can maybe um, have some kind of commentary on whatever particular thing I'm hoping to target, you know, be it
Mm.
political or be it economic or whatever,
Mm.
you know.
Mm.
It's the more I get into film, the more I feel like I'm a baby amongst it all. There's
Mm.
just so many things to
Of course.
learn
Yeah.
and feel like I'm educated enough to talk about. You
Yeah.
know, I wish I could have coupled it with another degree in like politics and economics, you know.
Mm.
But it's interesting in the fact that I can still learn those things
Yeah,
while doing film.
100%. So what was like the turning point for you to actually be like, okay, I want to do film? Like I know you said you started to think about it like when you were about to graduate, but what made you take the plunge?
I think it was just a decision that I, on a whim, you know. Knew that my parents were in that realm. Not that they had any real contacts back in Brisbane. I mean, there were some, but my mum worked as a journalist and news anchor for a while back in Queensland.
Yeah.
And so there was some of that. But, you know, when I was still in my undergrad, I was still learning the ropes on everything. You're kind of a flexible media professional in all spheres of things. It wasn't until my master's where I really honed in on particular type of work in film.
What do you think the biggest difference was with like your undergraduate and then like your master's?
Just being older, you know? And I mean, when you go into a master's, you're definitely, you know what you're going in for, and you're dedicated, and you approach it as more of a professional. I think when you're young, you're there to also meet like-minded people, and you make a lot of friends, and you're still learning the ropes, and you don't, you know, there's so much to take in at once. You don't even know how the industry may operate, or people in the industry may network or interact with one another, you know?
Actually, I feel like that reminds me of like when I was in Brisbane and I would do like student films, and it's definitely, I don't know if I think I've done like one like master's film or so, but I feel like on student projects that's just, I don't know how to put it, but there's so many, like I think everyone is obviously like trying, but then it also feels like everyone's on like different levels of how much they care about the project.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like with like masters, because obviously no, like you choose whichever one that you want to do, but you're actively being like, I want to, you know, do more when it comes to this, that it feels like people are a bit more
definitely
locked in.
I mean, my master's had specialized fields that you enter into. You consciously pick. So there are people, you know, there might be 5 or 6 editors who want to be editors. And so when you're working with them on the project, they're not kind of, you know, in your undergrad, you're kind of, oh, I'm this and this. I also want to be a director, or I also want to be a writer besides being an editor. Of course, the passion is to want to do those development roles in like writing or directing. But it's nice going into masters and not having to ever think about that. Your project is the one you're working on, and you're trying to bring in the best members of that you can of what you think would fit the film. You know, it's from the cohort. And on talking to that idea of being older too, you know more.
Yeah.
And you think about the world in a different way.
Yeah.
And I'm better able to identify my interests and incorporate that into my work. Like we were talking about architecture.
Yeah.
You know, that's part of my whole spiel. Yeah.
It's interesting. I feel in a way that like society kind of praises you to be like young and have achieved all these things, but then I think about myself when I was like 20, I was losing my mind. I was like, so like I just didn't know like what I was doing. Obviously I still don't know what I'm doing, I'm still figuring that out. But I think now being like a bit older that I feel more grounded, and I think that I prefer this version of myself. But then I don't know if I'm like scared about turning like 30 soon, but I'm like, but also I feel like age is like a weird thing, like especially with like, you know, directing and film, that like most people who are like super successful are like so like not so old, but are like, you know, quite old. How does that make you feel that like most directors are like literally 50 or 60?
Yeah, it's a long game.
Yeah.
It's a long game. And a lot of the time I am feeling very down even about my own work, despite whatever award I might get. It's kind of, I think there's a problem with comparison especially with social media these days.
Of course.
And it's almost like you want to get off it, but you can't really because we're so integrated into our lives.
Mm.
But I remember asking my dad, what his best favorite decade was. It was when he was in his 40s. So
Really?
it's not as if
Okay.
you're in a
Why was that?
your 30s. I think because you have your business, or you know what you're doing, and you've been doing it for a while, and you've built up your networks, and then you're kind of in that environment where you feel like you've become quite skilled at it. And I mean, I'm still young. Like, I'm 27.
Oh, so like we're still young.
Yeah.
Which is honestly, if you think about it in the grand scheme of life, it's pretty crazy that like, like I feel like after, especially with like modeling and stuff, that, when I'd be like, oh, I'm 23, and then I'd be like, oh, I'm 27, and people are like, whoa, really?
Yeah.
Oh my God, like you look so much younger, and I never quite know how to like take that.
It's strange how the modeling world works like that.
Yeah,
So.
it is quite like it is different because it's especially like a lot of people who get into that realm are like 15, 16. And then by the time you're like 17, 18 is when it's like, okay, everything, goes more at full force.
It's almost like you're launched straight into this like full-on professional career, but at 18.
So crazy.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen to me because I obviously like went to uni, and it was more when I was like 22, 23 that I started modeling.
Yeah.
So for like in that industry, it's like kind of old.
You say 27 is old, on the older end?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, the people are like, oh my God. But I think there's like something that's like nice about film, knowing that it requires a lot of life experience and a lot of, different kinds of people and different kinds of like walks of life, that it attracts more like, people that are older. That kind of feels like a bit nicer.
Yeah, I mean, definitely on the development end, if you're, I think it helps if you're writing, and directing, of course, by extension. I mean, most people are just in, a lot of them are in crew roles. I mean, producers, the more well-rounded you are with film and life experience, the more you can pick out projects that might be of interest to the general public. But I do think that we're still, just like modeling, we're influenced by the commercial industry in a big way. And I mean, Australia's got some kind of issue with it, I feel, where a lot of the people that you see on screen are these perfect representations of what we're meant to be, and it's not necessarily reality. And I think that a lot of filmmakers, this isn't to say that filmmakers all are the same.
Yeah, of
I
course.
mean, a lot of them are influenced by the US big time, and want to be the flashy next big director or actor or star. But I think there's more to film than that, and there are many other films being made that are, rely on documentary reality or about more nuanced themes or political. And yeah, I think Australia's slowly shifting towards a more indie kind of scene. There's a new wave of filmmakers coming through, I think. And but yeah, it's I mean, you feel it when you're in Sydney. It's definitely the entertainment capital of Australia.
Yeah. Sure. How does that influence like the work that you want to be doing, or your previous work of kind of like figuring out where you sit? Because I think commercial's not bad, but then it's also like finding something that's like authentic to you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of self-reflection that comes with it. I think at every step of the way, usually every week, almost every day, I'm thinking about my previous work or
Yeah.
ideas or themes that or even like camera techniques, weirdly, like ideas on movement and stasis
Mm.
pop into my mind and I'll write them down. But I'm very much concerned about the way the world is leaning more towards far right politics and
Mm.
fascist leaning tendencies.
Mm.
And I think film has a large role to play in that because, commercial cinema, you're screening to large groups of people at the same time. And, a lot of things can be imbued with politics, and film can be propaganda.
Mm.
You can see, look at a lot of the Marvel films that came out several years ago, or even now. There's a good versus bad dichotomy in there, when in reality the world's much more gray, much more complicated than that. But it fuels a lot of that kind of hero mentality, and I find that the more concern I have with that world and this world, the more I feel like I'm responsible as an artist to try and shift the way people think, or just make work that shifts people's opinions, or ideally making people smarter about things, yeah, just I'm worried about the level of education people have and media literacy people have.
Actually, I like your point on how much, like, subconsciously that films affect us. And I think, obviously, like, recently I've been, like, I always try to go to the cinemas, but recently I've been trying to go more. And apart from it just being, like, an experience of something that you do with, like, friends and loved ones, it's crazy that sometimes I'll think about even, like, the career that I decided to do, or moments where I felt the most seen, and that was, like, through film. What role do you think, like, films play in, like, society, and why are they important?
It's just similar to any other art form, but I just think that there is that power to influence large groups of people. And but I mean, films are still artifacts of
A time.
a time and place.
Yeah.
And you can chart films through history and look at the big events or national events that were happening around the time. And you can kind of see why they were made, or what influenced them to be made. In reality, I don't really know how things are shaping up, or going to be shaping up, but it's like you want to hope that a lot of filmmakers can, a lot of filmmakers who are concerned can be supported. I think a lot of the gatekeepers here in Australia aren't, they like films, but I worry about, what types of films they're actually consuming at the same time. If they're open to international cinema or films outside of the pipeline of what's coming out on Netflix and things like that.
Yeah.
And I really hope that they're open-minded about emerging filmmakers in Australia, and not just filmmakers who are just completely interested in commercially minded work. But you never know. I would hope that the next generation of producers and execs and financiers are very passionate about film as an art form, and not just as a commercial means. Yeah, our open-minded.
I always find it hard with, obviously I can't speak too much on this, but a lot of, like, the Australian films that I've seen, sometimes it feels like me living in more of, like, a city, like I don't know how to put it, like, say being in Sydney or so, that it feels like the Australia that's kind of, I'm I'm like trying to put this, like, how do I say this without being, it's just a lot of the films that I see, it feels like it's very about like the outback or very just
Yeah.
kind of, I don't like the, like on the other sort of like spectrum. And I'm sure that there's other like films that I just haven't seen personally, but I don't know. I I'm just like keen for people to do more about what, you know, life is like for, say, like you and I, like
Yeah.
living in more of like a, like rather than really playing into the stereotypes of Australia. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Um,
It's strange how filmmakers are still feed into this, like the Australian identity persona that it has been built up over time here.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I feel a lot of films are still based on that kind of setting. I
Yeah.
don't know whether or not it's to showcase that aspect of Australia to international audiences, but everyone already kind of gets that.
Yeah,
Gets the point.
which I'm like is really cool and obviously makes, you know, us really different, but it just feels like there's definitely more stories to be told.
Yeah. I completely agree. I mean, there needs to be more stories set in the cities. I mean, most of the population are in the city centers.
Yeah, literally. Like, have you ever been to the Outback? Not saying that there's anything wrong with the
I
Outback.
actually haven't, and I really wish I
Yeah,
had
I
went.
haven't as well.
And yeah, it's amazing how we haven't
We
done
haven't.
it, you know. And but I definitely think there Australia's got a whole issue with its own
Identity.
identity and its
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
its colonization roots in
Yeah.
colonization
Yeah.
and you know there's so many indigenous stories that also need to be
Yeah.
told, but also just culturally I don't think the white Australians ever really integrated much of the indigenous culture anyway, you know,
No.
and it's such a shame.
Mm.
You know,
Mm. Mm.
and
Mm.
I wish, I mean, I hope that there's more work going to be done in the future about it, because then it would be a much more interesting place. At the
Mm.
moment, when I came to Australia, and while I still live here, I mean, moving to Brisbane was one thing. And then coming to Sydney, I thought there might be there's definitely more of a diversity of stuff you can do here, but
Yeah.
it's still quite homogenous.
Mm.
Um,
As in
compared-
Sydney,
I mean Australia.
Australia's all.
Yeah, it feels very culturally similar all over the place, and I wonder if it's because it's been so taken over by this colonial force that's not been here that long.
Mm. Mm.
And yeah, it's a whole thing. It's a whole
How
thing.
how do you think growing up in, like, I guess this is a big question, but how do you think growing up in Thailand and having, you know, that like base, you know, as like your background has influenced you as like a filmmaker?
It definitely means that I don't have a proper home. I don't
Mm.
think. I mean, I don't have the same shared experience as you might with people who grew up here.
Mm.
You know the environment way better than I do.
Mm.
I definitely feel if I go back to Bangkok specifically,
Mm.
I would know the feeling of the place.
Mm.
But growing up with Australian parents, I was never born a Thai citizen.
Mm.
And so whenever I go back as a tourist.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wait, even though you were
Yeah.
born there?
Yeah, they've got different rules
Oh,
on
okay.
citizenship.
Yeah, yeah.
And which is fine. But
Yeah.
I mean,
So it doesn't, would you say it doesn't fully feel like home?
yeah, it doesn't.
Okay.
I
Hmm.
want to go back and be able to, you know, one of my great shames or sense of guilt is that when I was a little kid, I didn't properly want to learn Thai as much as I do now.
Yeah.
But I mean, how can you tell a younger version of yourself to learn something that they don't want to do?
Yeah.
So I learned French better.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do you speak French?
A little bit.
Oh my God, I actually
It's-
didn't even know that.
Yeah, it's my favorite subject.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, there's always this sense of separation. I was always a fran, a white kid,
Mm.
and and will always be seen that way, never properly integrated. But
Mm.
I I still think Thailand and Bangkok is a massive melting pot of cultures and people.
Mm.
I I say it feels like a dream, and it kind
Mm.
of does, not having been there for about 8 years now.
Mm.
But I definitely still feel that I'm not
Mm.
a full-blown Australian living here.
Mm.
I'm always a degree of separation. And
Mm.
it does influence my work.
Mm.
Like the last film I'd made was a Hungarian film,
Mm.
completely in Hungarian, based on my father's
Mm.
side,
Mm. How,
but about migrants.
yeah, how did that come about? Obviously, like, you know, your dad, but like when did you start to kind of like develop that idea?
It was weird. We had to conceive of the idea when we began studying it after. So it was like week 4 of my first year of the masters, where you got to put forward the ideas.
Week 4?
Week 4,
Oh
the
my
ideas you're gonna
God.
make for your final year film. It was pretty crazy. I think
What?
they've changed it, but
That's intense.
yeah. And when one of the stories that I felt very drawn to was the story of my grandparents leaving Hungary. Basically, there was a massive revolution in Hungary post World War II.
Mm.
The Soviets came back in and crushed the revolution my grandfather was a part of.
Mm.
He had to leave the country. My grandmother went with him. And I wanted to do a film about that. But, how can you feasibly make a film set in Hungary, in Australia,
Mm.
with all these Hungarian actors?
Mm.
I still felt that I wanted to do a Hungarian film, maybe set it here with a small, tight-knit family. They're in a rural area.
Mm.
And the intensity of the original film that I wanted to do, which was pretty full on,
Mm.
and I would still love to make.
Mm.
I felt it was very horrific, and so I thought, why not turn that into a genre film
Mm.
and make a horror? But it's a type of film that kind of goes between a drama or horror.
Mm.
The drama feeds into the horror.
Mm.
And I'm amazed we were just able to pull it off with amazing Hungarian cast in Australia.
How did that happen?
Well, I mean, we found our lead through a Facebook post.
It's so cool.
She was trained in Europe and the States, and she gave it everything. And I think I'm very fortunate to have been able to do that and pull it off. I feel like I was able to pull it off. And it just felt, we had longer cuts of the film, and I had to cut it down and then change the tone. And in the end, it felt something that felt very true to myself and a genuine expression of my feelings towards that aspect of my life and my history. That, it felt very satisfying. It felt like a film I could confidently put out and be proud of to represent, ideally that group of people. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of migrants came from, particularly Europe during World War II and after it. But yeah, I think, Australia seems to go through waves of remembering and forgetting that it's made up of people from overseas.
Literally. Yeah, it's actually so multicultural.
Instead of this Ocker Australian outback farmer. I'm just kidding. But not. But
it's like, where they at? Well, they are out there, but like, don't know any of them. But I remember seeing you like in that period. Like I went over to your place and you were like editing and like talking about the film, and it was very much so that I feel like that time period that you were in that bubble and like married to that project. I feel like recently there's been a lot of like discourse about who should have the rights to doing like a cut when it comes to like a film. Like, should it be the director? Should it be like the producer? What are your thoughts on that?
there are very different ways you can approach it. Very different. And it depends on the people you're working with. It depends on who's come up with the story and what kind of vision you're trying to put forward. Ideally, you want to be working with people who share similar, who can understand you very well. Because then, of course, you know, it's a massive undertaking to make something like a film. This film, you know, it would, in the real world, it would have cost a lot of money, and there were loads of people involved. You know, there's above 50 for sure. All the external stakeholders who aren't even accredited in the film as well, you know. That, let's say you go into a feature film, you got how many, like 100 or more?
Yeah, like so many.
And it's extremely stressful. And you need to be working with people that you can continue working with throughout those really low lows. And they are low lows. Even in this film, it's like you really hope that you're not wasting 2 years of your life. This took 2 years for 15 minutes. And you want it to be good. And you want it to help change your career in some way or get you into doing that.
Yes, and or room.
And I think when you're working in development or you're working around so many people, you have to be really good at talking to people and working with people. I think directors should be more interested in all kinds of people and stories, because then there's inspiration all around you, and there's people really do want to help. Well, I found that a lot of people do.
Yeah.
But it just helps to know more of the world around you too. You know, that's my opinion, anyway.
I only say that because I was watching like a snippet from the Golden Globes, and I think like the best film award was like The Brutalist or something, and when the director was like accepting his speech, he was like, the director should always have the final cut also.
I would agree. Well, in principle, I agree. And it would be nice if directors did have final cut. But that being said, you know, you can also have, not that you know, some, actually I shouldn't say that.
What?
I was going to, a hot take. But I think any director who makes a film on that scale, you have to be competent. You have to kind of know what you're doing for it to even cut together and work.
Yeah.
So I can't bag too much on directors. But there are times when directors can be in the wrong, but I do think that if these are not necessarily not directors for hire per se, but people who are also involved in the development and writing, you know, they're also seeing how the film comes about in the frame and what's happening outside the frame, but also in the edit of it, besides the writing of it. And so, I mean, the sound, the music, and the design, all those conversations. So they're married. They're definitely married to it. And but that interesting film, The Brutalist.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
It's a Hungarian story.
Yeah.
About a Hungarian architect called Laszlo.
Yeah.
And that's the name of my grandfather, and he was an architect.
Oh my god, really?
Yeah, I had a weird connection to this film. Yeah, it was very surprising.
Wow. It hasn't come out in Australia yet, has it?
I went to a early screening in December.
Oh, okay. Of course.
It's a 3-hour film.
I've heard.
And it's got an intermission.
Far out.
Yeah, it doesn't feel that long.
Yeah.
It feels okay. I took my mom to it.
I'm keen to see it. I recently went and watched have you seen Anora?
I actually haven't, and I really do have to see it.
Yeah.
I think it's playing today.
Yeah.
I might go see it today.
At the Ritz?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I went. And I feel like recently there's been a lot of films coming out that I've been quite like interested in, and I'd heard reviews about Anora, and then I went like by myself. Also, movie solo dates are like the best thing. Like just going by yourself.
I fully fully back that.
Yeah, yeah. And then I watched it and I loved the film so much that then I did a deep dive into like the main actress and then the director. And obviously, like, I feel like saying this, I'm like, it actually makes sense. But with him, that he, like, the director, he does the writing, directing, and the like editing. And I'm like, wow, that, like, is that normal for like most directors to be that close to their work? Or I guess it like differs.
I would say not usually in that type of on that scale. I mean, I've also got a background as an editor. So when I worked on my last film, it was a very close relationship, and we got along very well. And it was a lot of fun. But it's harder to approach financiers when you're doing a feature film like that and saying that you're also going to be doing the editing for the film.
Yeah.
But Sean Baker's also done 2 other features that have done incredibly well. So I think he can confidently
Like do that.
go into those rooms and say that I'm going to be editing.
Yeah. I was like, wow, that is like, that's a huge workload.
Yeah, but he would have had more control over the way he wanted it to be told and structured, even the feeling of it. Sometimes it's harder when you're working with having to try to get what you're trying to do to someone else, where it might not be clicking or where you just feel very confident in your ability to be able to do it.
What's your approach when it comes to your actors? And I feel like I forget who the director is, but he's like Japanese or something like that. I can't remember the name, but this particular person was speaking about when it comes to films that he feels that when you start recording the film or all the different components, like, he doesn't know what the film is going to be, you know? It depends on what happens, like, in the moment.
Yes.
Also, like, kind of, I can't remember who his name is, and I probably butchered that explanation. But what's your approach when it comes to the actors and actually bringing the story off of the page?
I usually know the tone. Like, it was interesting for this film, completely in Hungarian. I don't speak the language.
By the way, the name of the film is Bor.
Bur.
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 It's called Skin in English. But yeah, I go in. I mean, I've met with the actors. Casting is incredibly important. The right look, the right feel. Casting is like 80-90%. And the level of training the actors has is also a factor. You know, you don't necessarily have to have trained actors. It really depends on the type of film that you're making. You know, for a horror film that's shot out of order, generally it's much easier time for someone to be trained so that they're not exhausted by 10 hours of having to go up and down for different scenes, and do that for 5 days straight. So that was a factor, and we're lucky we found trained actors for this. But I already know the type of tone and the feeling that I'd like to get out of the scene when I'm going in. But that isn't to say that I'm not open to ideas. I'm very open, and there'll be times when you're on set, and even the type of shot listing where you don't even have a shot that you particularly have pre-planned. You've got to figure out on the day. I mean, those are scary for me. Some directors have been able to work like that, but I'm definitely still in the very like meticulous planning and execution of that shot and plan. But yeah, that isn't to say I'm not open. I am, but within the frameworks I've already set up. Because once you start deviating, you start losing time.
Yeah. Okay. So you feel by having these things that you set up, that it then allows you like more flexibility to be able to actually bring the story to life.
Yeah, I mean, there have been times where I will sit on one shot, and usually, I mean, I'm working with digital, so I've got almost unlimited amount of video I can capture instead of film, where you're limited to film stock. So I've been times where I just like to improv on the spot for like 15 minutes for one shot and just go back and forth, and just sit in that
As in,
moment.
like, the actors improving?
Yeah,
Yeah.
or we'll sit on a shot, we'll do the action or the scene, and then we'll keep it running. I might give some direction, and then we'll try it again,
Yeah.
or different physical movement. Because I like being in the, I like the intensity of being in the moment, and the camera's running, and no one on set is talking. You're just playing the scene. It's almost like a religious experience, right? I mean, that's why some people like shooting on film, because it matters so much.
Yeah.
That moment matters. The amount of
Yeah.
film that you use matters.
Yeah.
Where everyone is so
Locked in.
yeah, but it's it's almost like a high. And when you're on set for 10 hours, you're having to be extremely focused for that time. And by the end, I mean, you might be tired, but it's almost like you want to keep doing it. You're kind of addicted to
Yeah.
that feeling of achieving something
Yeah.
that's very difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, weirdly.
Oh, I love. I love like seeing you talk about like this, and obviously like we've been friends for a while, but like I don't know, we never really like I never like go into like a deep dive to be like, hey,
Yeah,
you
it's
know.
very particular special interest.
Yeah, 100%. We've recently been like talking about like different projects we're potentially doing, perhaps, and I feel like in the process of us kind of like back and forth, like sending each other audio notes, that you said this thing that's really stuck with me. That whenever I've sent you an audio note, you'll be like, oh, thanks for sending that, Cynthia. I'm going to go away and daydream about it. And then I started thinking about the concept of like daydreaming and how much that actually is so important when it comes to like creativity. But I'd love for you to like speak on what you mean by like daydreaming, and how that even influences your work and like the way that you view creativity, because obviously, you kind of start with this like little idea, and it can be like struck, or it can come in any way, but then like how does it develop through daydreaming?
Yeah, I think early on, for any idea, I mean, these are all ideas that you have to be really committed to at the end of the day, and really inspired by. Otherwise, you're like, you're pushing through something that you haven't fallen in love with, really, and then just makes it more difficult, and just you feel bad about the work. But whenever starting work on a project, I'll do a lot of surrounding reading about it on themes or ideas that I'm interested in, and keep the project in mind, constantly. And whenever something pops up here or there, you might not be consciously thinking about the project, but something will trigger you to have a thought in relation to what you've just experienced or seen. You write it down. Great, that's one note. And then you just sit on it for several weeks or months or a year. And I've spent the last year thinking of 2 features, and it's just little notes here and there. And you do all this reading and this heavy theory stuff, and you slowly start to build up these notes where you can then start putting them together. And you start to have a vision or a way of approaching a particular idea that you feel quite confident about. Be it poetic or be it very logically constructed. I found that works for me better. But of course, it's also good to eventually have like a fire under you and a deadline. That's when you have team members keeping you accountable, producers, because then you're actually having to finally put it together. In which case, you might not you know, you might not do if you've got all this free time and flexibility.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's, you know, it's a collection of thoughts over time, and I
Mm,
think you're not forcing yourself to come up with something.
mm,
That's the idea of daydreaming that I have.
mm, mm,
But also just, I I think we spend so much time indoors and on our phones now that,
mm,
you know, what's there are times where I just go for a walk or just be outside for an extended period of time and
mm.
just not listen to anything, but just you're in the world and
I agree. I feel like even I have forgotten how to be bored, and a lot of the times like I'll go to the post office and my post office is always like so packed. And I'll just like pull out my phone, look at a message, look at it, just look at something. And I feel like a couple of years ago, I always would just like think of like random ideas, but I think it was just because I not necessarily like sat with myself, but I gave myself more space to just like think, you know?
yeah.
I feel like now I'm making myself sound like I'm just really like numb to the world, but
No, no, no.
especially now, I think it's you have to make more of like a conscious effort to
Mm.
try and tap into um that way of thinking or that way of being.
Yeah, just shows how addicted, you know,
Mm.
these devices are.
How do you like go about it? Because like we were saying before that it's what like I feel like I always am kind of like, oh, I'm just gonna jump off my phone, I'm just gonna delete this, but then it's also like information, like I'm sure that you find out about like certain things, so
Mm.
there's I don't know, there's a fine line, but yeah, how do you go about that?
Yeah, I, I mean, I also find it really difficult.
Mm,
Um, it just shows how much it's been built into our lives,
mm,
and it's scary in a way. Um, Not that it isn't an extension of ourselves, but this need to accelerate. You know, I think there's a big movement in particular right leaning philosophy
mm,
that's all about accelerationism and just needing to speed up, and you
mm,
know, this process of capitalism has to, you know, churn out things faster and
mm,
be more efficient,
mm.
when in reality I don't think we're not built like robots, you
Yeah.
know. And I think that's why it's more interesting to me to go back to looking at all these I don't know. I'm interested in communities that are outside of cities or have
Mm,
different approaches to thinking about the world that isn't so
mm,
commercially focused.
mm,
Because I do think there are inherent values in those systems of thinking
mm,
that is lost. You know, there's a sense of magic about it,
mm,
and I think people need more magic and openness in their lives, or
mm,
this idea of spiritual openness,
mm.
not necessarily a religious
Yeah.
experience or any dogma of any kind, but just I think people are so driven by logic now that, um, you know, and structures and
Mm,
all these built up things that
mm,
it's become very machinic. And
mm,
I'm more interested in the organic and what it means to be human as
mm,
in my work than
mm,
anything else.
No, I love that. I quickly wanted to. This is super random, but I love your take on it. I feel like growing up, like same age, when it came to like rom coms and like back in the day, I feel like 90s, 2000s, it felt like there was just so many. I don't know. Are you into rom coms at all?
I've watched some. I wasn't massively into them. I've
Okay.
only recently watched a bunch, but from that era, yeah.
Yeah, it felt like there was just like more films that were made in that kind of like realm. And for me personally, like I still go back and watch those shows, and like they still have like an effect on me.
Mm.
But now, like in our modern times, I feel like when people kind of try to like tap into that world or like replicate it, it just feels like it doesn't hit the same. And I've been trying to like figure out what it is. Like if it's just like our times that sometimes when people are doing things it feels really cringe,
Yeah.
or if it's like the writing, or if it's like there's just like too much budget allocated like to it, that
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but I'm like it's, you know, like it just feels like they don't make films in that like genre
Yeah.
the
And
same.
it could be trends. It could be the fact that they were making more films like that, so filmmakers were more skilled in that domain, or writers were more in that zone. But they were also kind of particular types of um, relationships, you know? This particular type of vision of relationships that we still
Yeah.
cling to. I mean, this idealistic fantasy, but it was all created, you know.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, culture's changing, and
Yeah.
we're different now. I think maybe people haven't been able to properly tell romances, or they have, and we just haven't seen much of them.
Yeah,
Inundated with Hollywood films.
they had recently, I think it was Anyone But You.
Yeah,
And that apparently did really well in the
yeah.
box
They've
office.
got star factor behind that too.
Yeah, but it's just, I don't know, like to this day, my favorite movie, or one of my favorite movies, is still Clueless.
I haven't seen Clueless,
Oh,
and I see it.
it's so
I
good.
love About Time. That's one of my
Well, who's in
comfort
that
films.
one? I think I've seen it.
I can't remember the names.
Wait,
I'm really bad with
what's the
names.
basis? What's the basis?
This guy can travel. He goes into a closet. He can travel back in time, and
Okay, okay.
it's got Bill Nye in it. And
I think I've seen it.
yeah, it's it's one of those like feel good self films that I cry to at the end.
Yeah. I don't know. I want more films like that just feels like a comfort, you know, that I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's interesting how a lot of people seek films as a comfort sort of
Yeah.
thing. But I wonder if people should be seeing more films that challenge them.
Mm.
So that's a debate in itself.
Mm.
But yeah,
But I think that both can like exist.
they both can.
Yeah.
I think that the Hollywood model is definitely escapist.
Yeah.
And people want to escape from the reality of the world.
Mm.
But I think that problems have become and grown so much in scale that people should be aware of them and should, you know, be driven to act or to speak up or understand what's going on around them, just so that they can help shift things and
Yeah.
you know why, you know, if there's so much money circling around in the world, you know, and but so many communities and people who are really struggling with nothing, and it's a shame that, you know, it that can continue to exist, when people within their good conscience should be working together to change that. You know, we're living in a system that we're still, you know, putting all our money and time into, and I think we should be open to other ways of seeing how people can live, and but it's things like that don't change quickly, or if they do, it's never usually without bloodshed and violence, which I would never want.
No, I agree. I agree 100%. I guess what's next for you?
Just working on two projects, two
Yeah.
features. I'm going to the Australian International Documentary Conference in March.
Okay.
Would love to lean into documentary. Try
Yeah,
and get that going.
I'm very intrigued.
Yeah, the feature I have set in Thailand is a hybrid kind of mixed documentary. The film I want to do here is more hardcore. It's like a psychosexual drama, but more satirical. Yeah, just working on that. I think that they're challenging films,
Yeah.
but I love the challenge of it, and it gets me reading and learning about interesting things.
Mm.
But yeah, still open to short projects, but
Mm.
I, I, I yeah, I have to fall in love with them and think on them, and
Mm.
it's hard to go back into doing another short narrative after this one. It's just
Mm.
such a big thing, and I really want to make that step into making feature films.
Yeah, 100%. How, well, obviously every project's different, but how long does it usually take for like a project to, you know, actually come to life and execute it? Because obviously, like money and people and.
I think the average time for a first feature,
Mm.
someone told me this, was like 5 to 7 years in Australia.
Whoa.
Yeah, from start to finish.
Mm.
Um, I've already done 1 year of ideating, so
Mm-hmm.
that's 1 year down.
Okay.
Um, yeah, long game. So
Yeah.
I try to make sure every project is worth it and something that I'd be happy to look back on and be like,
And be.
that was a key
Mm.
stepping stone.
Mm.
You know.
Mm. But easier said for me, like to say this, but I like that in a world where we're very much so about like short gains and accelerating. That it's cool that you really need to like love something or have like a big interest because it's a very
Mhm.
it's a long scope.
Yeah, and you hope it pays off,
Yeah.
and you hope it can even get up and be made in the first place.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see.
I have every faith in you. So I always love to end the podcast with asking around the same set of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, living or dead, you're at a dinner party, can invite two people. Who would they be?
I'd bring David Lynch back from the grave.
Oh my god, I was gonna ask you about that, but then I was like, oh, is that just so yeah, I was like everyone's but yeah, how did he influence you and what
I think his
how
films
did
are
you
just...
feel about well, how did you feel about him passing away, but how did that affect you?
No, I mean, he was quite old, but it's surprising. You'd hope that he'd come out with another film, but I think he influenced so many people. To be honest, just coming out of America, that whole period of films, especially out of the '80s and onwards. But yeah, and besides that, maybe I actually don't know.
Or it could just be you and David Lynch.
David Lynch. There's a whole group of people that I'd probably invite. I can't think on the spot.
It's alright. Okay, you and David Lynch at a dinner. Okay, if you had one day to live, what would be your last meal?
My last meal.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. I love my dad and grandmother's spaghetti marinara.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
Whenever I go back, I always have that.
Yeah. Love. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
None that I can remember.
Okay. Love. What if you could spread one message to the world, what would it be?
Wake up. Wake up. No, not for that. That's cheesy. Love, not war.
Oh.
Love, not war. No more fighting, please. Yeah.
I love that. And I feel like just because we're talking so much about films, but letterbox moment, because apparently this is letterbox. But 3 of your favorite films.
3? I've got 4 in my favorites.
Okay, 4. Do they usually do 4?
They do 4.
Okay, 4.
You got to watch David Cronenberg's Crash. That is a phenomenal film. It's a psychosexual thriller or drama. Pretty full on, but amazing. Not a film I would recommend anyone,
Mm-hmm.
everyone, but
Okay.
worth it. Definitely watch. There's an Iranian director called Kiarostami. He did a film called Taste of Cherry.
Mm.
Beautiful film.
Mm.
There's an incredible war film that was made by a Russian director called Come and See that everyone should watch.
Mm.
Just the execution and just the how full on it is, very confronting,
Mm.
but amazing.
Mm.
And there's a film out of South America that I love called Embrace of the Serpent,
Mm.
which is about colonialism in, I think it was Brazil and the Amazon. Black and white,
Mm.
but very engaging, very beautiful, amazing film.
Oh my God, amazing. I'm actually gonna go look all of these up.
Yeah, give them a go.
Yeah, I'm like, I've literally never heard of any of them. But
Yeah, they're very different. They're and they can be very challenging.
how do you try and like seek out films that aren't in like, mainstream cinemas?
Just by reading. I mean, SBS On Demand actually has stuff that's not usually on Netflix and stuff,
Yeah.
which is great to see.
Yeah.
Even Mubi has a lot of good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And once you get into those types of films, then you start looking at those directors, and once you get into more niche films, even on Letterboxd, you get more nuanced, interesting reviews
Yeah.
and people who create lists about these types of films that are harder to find. But
Yeah. How much of like reviews do you actually like look at before you watch a film?
I don't usually read them before.
Okay, yeah, I feel that as well. I feel like I just kind of like watch a trailer, and if I'm like, oh, that looks cool, then I just like watch it rather than being like,
Yeah.
did people love this?
I look at the ratings sometimes and be like, so have a 4 out of 5 or usually something like that. Generally, that's a good indication. Yeah.
Love. Well, Dylan, thanks for coming on to Taylu Podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was lovely.
You're welcome, and I'm excited to see what the year / what's next, and yeah, thank you all for listening.
If anyone's in Melbourne, reach out.
Yeah,
I'll be in Melbourne.
Dylan's moving to Melbourne, which is super exciting. I feel like that's definitely going to be your vibe. Not that Sydney wasn't your vibe, but I feel like Melbourne will be more of your vibe.
We'll see.
100%. Okay, catch you guys later. Bye.
Bye.